All happy? Seats taken?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for coming today, ladies and gentlemen. I can say that now. This is a very special experience for all of us. It's the second time we've been able to do this in our friendship group, so hopefully there'll be more. So be making notes for future authors in the room. I thought I'd start off by kind of mentioning that I know Albert, this is a huge big deal for you, but for me it's really nice to see somebody that I've known for 15 years, but apparently only started speaking to at university from what I've heard earlier on, really go through such a journey to be able to, just through education, thinking of what they're doing in their own lives, academia, teaching, and then actually producing something that people can actually read and use. And I think it's really important on the culture part. We talk about everybody's contribution towards the Ummah and how we go forward. And I know there's a lot of scholarly trained people that we know and people who are at the forefronts of the hard part of the religion. But I think culture and writing and the entertainment sphere is one that we're not as good at. And making sure that we have access to people and leaders that can actually write and contribute towards something is something that we shouldn't, put to one side. And actually, there's a barakah in what's going on here. To be able to take this book and be able to give to your children rather than the nonsense that we get online and we spend most of our time with is a real benefit. And hopefully this isn't the first one. Hopefully we'll be getting to more books later. But I just want to say thank you for all that, and it's really appreciated your contribution to our community. Running order for today, what I'll do is we will start off by doing a short intro piece of something that I found really interesting in the book, and then Albert will then go through a little chapter or a little section that he thinks is interesting. I've got some questions to go through, which we'll see how quickly we can get through, and then Q&A from the audience. So please do pay attention, make sure you've got those crisp and clear questions. People will be trickling in as the time goes through, but hopefully we can get a real understanding of how you came up with this book and why it's so important to you. Happy? Woo! You always need a hype man in the crowd, so I brought my own. And actually, having spoken about that, you've managed to do some serious marketing on this. So not only is the book to send out in all good Amazon shops near you, and across the border there, you've got T-shirts as well. Yeah. And I think we've got a couple of examples. We've got merchandise here, so please feel free to buy and look at them as you can. Our wonderful assistant's going to show them. And I must ask, what is it on the back?
So that's the title of the book, isn't it?
Yep.
Top one is written in Korean, same word. So, can you read it? Haga, I think it is.
Descent, yes.
So descent, going that way. And the other one's in kanji, because it just looked nicer. So same word.
Kanji is a different type of
Yeah,
font.
it's Japanese.
Okay.
It's like special alphabet they have.
Interesting.
Based on, I think, Chinese characters. But obviously the other languages have more like connotations to the words. So
as in different meanings.
Yeah. So it could also mean like in terms of like politically, like falling and stuff like that.
That's really interesting. And see, that's just the title. We haven't even got into the actual book yet. Right. So I'd say favourite part, the bit that really struck out to me was, first of all, the language and the type of language you use in this book. I've never really seen description read like this. And I'm going to go through basically one page, and you'll see what I mean. And if you know me as an individual, you'll know why this hit me. So, chapter 25, Arsonist. At the edge of the bustling restaurant kitchen, Yura sat at the bottom of the staircase which led to Nairon's office, awaiting her appointment. She found herself surrounded by a cacophony of culinary activity, a mouth-watering scent of steak fat being rendered on a skillet, the briny aroma of seafood being grilled, and the sweet smell of onions caramelizing filled the room. Her attempt to collect her thoughts became an arduous task, as the clattering of pots, the chef's rhythmic chopping of vegetables, and the sizzling symphony from various stovetops relentlessly invaded her consciousness. The heady aroma of spices and simmering sauces wafted through the air. Amidst the orchestrated chaos, Yura's contemplative silence was drowned out, her inner musings rendered inaudible against the backdrop of a kitchen in full swing. Takami was currently having a private meeting with Nairon. Yura asked her not to mention the samurai, but Takami had been awfully quiet since she got back into the car with her. She hadn't so much as lifted her mask since then. So, who knew if she would comply? Maintaining a low volume, Yura held her phone to her ear, listening on Takami's meeting. "I'm telling you now, before it gets to you through other means," came Nairon's voice, a trace of worry infiltrating his tone. "What did you do?" Takami said, her voice still weak, though barely noticeable through the voice modulator. it goes against your rules. But I'm telling you now, because you're my friend and I trust you, they're not my rules. I'm just the new enforcer. I've never gone from hungry to suspense in the space of one chapter, or one page, I should say. So that for me really did it, and I encourage you guys to go through it because there's so many other examples of this. But I'll let Arvel read his favourite.
You know, listening to that, I didn't realise how good of a writer I am. I never once read it out loud to myself.
Although enjoyable, we're going to go into some of the details of why you decided to write this, how long it took.
Yeah.
So I think the first question I'll ask is the first question most people ask is, what inspired you to write this book? And what messages, or one key message, do you hope readers take away from it?
Okay, so it kind of started in my final year of university, where I was just observing how well everybody around me was doing in their life, in terms of like the jobs they were getting, how well they were graduating, like with really high grades, and just doing things they wanted to do. And this is something that I've literally always wanted to do my entire life. I've also wanted to be into like creating movies and stuff, but I used to read so many books. I was like, I want to make my own. I actually attempted it at one point when I was a teenager, but I gave up on it halfway through.
Was that a similar plot?
No, completely different. And I started writing a story. It was super inspired by, if anybody's ever seen the show Westworld, season 1. So the ending to that season like really inspired me to like write a story which was like really complex and really unique. And I gave it to one of my friends, and I was like talking to him about the idea, and he was like, "This is a load of trash." And he was like, "I don't care about this character. Why are they going through so much crap constantly? It's really overly complicated. I have no idea what's going on." And then I changed my mind about it, and I was like, "Let me think about it. Why don't I just tell a story about something I would actually want to enjoy?"
Something you would read yourself?
Yeah, something I would read myself. And it actually started with this scene I had in my head, which was, so like a lot of Muslims get like arranged marriages and stuff. And I was thinking to myself, if I was to get married to this girl that I don't really know that well, like I've done all my research, I know I want to marry this girl, but I'm not close to her. Like I would be super uncomfortable on the first night in front of each other. Like, imagine how awkward that would be. So I wrote an entire chapter, which was their wedding night, and they're sitting in the room, they're really uncomfortable with each other, and then she wakes up in the middle of the night, not realising she's sleeping next to her husband, and kicks him in the stomach. And then I completely cut the chapter out, because I was like, it doesn't really push the story anyway. But I do make reference to it in one of the chapters. And then from there, I built an entire story around it.
I love how your biggest bit is a blooper.
Yeah.
The whole thing is to stick that out. So you went from creating the side of a couple, and then you built the scenery. Why South Korea?
It was partially because based on my original idea, which was, again, if anybody's seen the movie The Raid, it was super inspired by that. It's like just a pure action movie. It's action. There's a very small storyline to it. And I wanted to create a story like that, where it's just like, there's this guy, and he's getting chased by people, and he has no idea why, and it's just action. And it was going to take place all around the world, like with different gangs, and I was like, I want to take part of that idea, and then carry it on. So, like I was thinking, very notable gangs are like the Yakuza, Triads, so I was, let me stick with that area. And I was doing research, and I was looking at a lot of like Korean art and Chinese art, and like a lot of their movies were about, or a lot of the movies I watched were always about like the Japanese colonizing them and like trying to get their freedom and stuff like that. So I was like, why don't I tell a story where instead of Japanese losing control of them, they keep control of them.
A man in the high castle
Yeah.
Okay.
But then I also didn't want to tell a whole story where the entire universe would have to change based on that.
Okay.
So the idea was they switch sides, and then because they switched sides to the Americans, the UK, they were allowed to keep control of the countries they colonized.
Do you think you'll explore this in any future texts, this same area of the world?
So the way I did the world building it was very soft world building, so I didn't go too deeply into it. I kind of just hinted at it throughout the book. And the reason for that was because I wanted to keep it open enough that I could, if I ever wanted to go back to it, I could.
Interesting. And so I'll delve into more about the journey. So describe the journey from the initial idea, which we've kind of touched on, to the finished manuscript we have in front of us. And like, what was the most challenging parts for you? So you've gone soft world building, you've based it on characters that, you know, have personal interests, you know what you're going for, you've written the book as you, as a reader and an author in mind. But how did that journey go for you? That 5-year period?
So the first like year, it was just constant research and figuring out how you actually write. So like how to structure a story, how to write dialogue, how to set the scene, how to describe a character as well, which was interestingly, I learned a lot from that. There was one particular video which kind of explained that the way you describe a character, you don't just describe their features. The way you use the words has to give you an idea of their personality more than anything, rather than physically describing them, which was super interesting. So there was a lot of learning the first year, and then I got tired.
All self-taught.
Yeah, all self-taught. Yeah. Then I got tired of like planning an outline and not like being able to explore the middle section. So I just started writing it. So I had about the middle figured out. I had a few scenes in the I had the start figured out. I had a few scenes in the middle figured out, and I had the ending figured out. So I just started writing it. And then the first year was very, very slow because it was like COVID. Everyone's at home all the time. I didn't have a job. Hadn't started my PGCE yet. So I would do like a couple hours writing a few days a week. And that was me just kind of discovering what I wanted the story to be. And then I think probably like a year later, one of my friends I was kind of telling him that I was really struggling with a writer's block. So he was like, let's make you an author. And he took me to a cafe in Moseley. And so I just found it was really easy to work there because I could just sit there for ages. I could pray there, I could eat there, I could drink there. And I was just, every week I'd go and I'd start writing it. And because I was doing it every week, it got way easier. Because writing, it's like, I always say this, it's like a muscle. You have to train it. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And the less you do it, the weaker it gets. So you kind of forget how to write after a while. And then once you get back into it, you just get into it very quickly.
But I'd like to go back to your earlier point. You say that, you know, you were in a piece your first year where, you know, you were unemployed and you were at home or whatever, and you were looking at your friends and they were going on to do what you saw as these big amazing things, but like, you know, going through the lives and stuff like that. But I'd argue that actually what you ended up doing was much more fascinating than everybody else. Everybody else was going on like a single track approach that they would expect, you know, going to university, going into their own careers. But you actually did something really interesting there. So I want you to hold on to that thought, and we'll come back to it. I want to talk about some of the themes you actually have in the book itself. And one that was really interesting for me was the whole concept of criminals and law enforcement and like how that plays out with each other. So what were the biggest challenges you faced in depicting those interactions between criminals and law enforcement? Was there anything you picked up from your own life, how you've seen policing and criminality done in Birmingham or other areas? Like, what was it? How did you create what that world was, or did you do research on what the Korean situation was, or was it just something in your own mind?
To be honest, this is one of the things I struggled with the most because, like, yeah, there's a lot of crime in these areas, but I'm the youngest of 12, so I was kind of sheltered from that life, and I just keep my head down. So I've never really experienced it personally, and then with like law, there's so much procedure and stuff to it that just getting it to feel real was one of the things I really struggled with.
The sharp end of the law.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's also quite, I wouldn't say fantastical, but it errs on the side of like comedy and stuff. So it's not always pure grittiness.
There's a lot of wit in this.
Yeah.
It is very
So it was. So I did do like quite a bit of research. For example, because I wanted to mix both Korean and Japanese legal systems, and I was looking into how Japanese, they have like a 99% prosecution rate.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
And I wanted to kind of put that into the story in some way, shape, or form. So I do delve into that slightly, and then there's other parts where, like, I kind of question whether or not that's a good thing, seeing as how it plays out throughout the story.
And the Japanese legal system, that's really interesting because you make references throughout the book. So like the concept of habeas corpus, right to a free trial, and also this idea of innocent before proven guilty. You really tackle that at the heart of this, and the idea of what goes around it. That I didn't quite know when reading it. Is this something you intentionally had done, or you've done research into it? It's really fascinating that you broke down the legal systems, and obviously you make the point of in an empire environment, one system over the other. Did you find out that as you were writing, the Japanese legal system took more precedence than the Korean one, or was it just you looked at it as both source pieces of information and whatever worked for the text you approached for a chapter?
I tended to take Japanese as the one that took precedence, because they're the ones in power essentially. And a big theme of the story is, so the main protagonist, Yura, what she feels very strongly about is she feels like she's lost a lot of her culture essentially. So she has access to books from before they were colonized, from her grandparents, right? So she has seen in some light what life was like outside of Japanese rule, whereas the majority of people haven't. So she has more of an inclination towards their lost culture.
One of the big points of this book is that you try to write something with an Islamic-centered approach. Do you think it's similarly we are at the lower end of culture here? And do you think we have to fight in the same way?
I think, one thing I do think is, I think Islamophobia is actually the last socially acceptable form of bigotry. And I think people don't give enough attention to how much power the media actually has. Because when I was growing up, I would be watching TV constantly, I'd be watching movies, and I would say, as weird as this is, it kind of played into the morals I have now, considering like how many superhero shows I watched.
As it shaped you?
Yeah, I think it did play a part into it. And if we want to fight back against that culture of people accepting Islamophobia, it needs to be us to do it. That's
we need to make our own culture.
Yeah.
We need to be producing our own books, our own media. Okay.
There's no point complaining if you're not going to provide a solution to it.
And that was a driving force for the book as well.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And then similarly, what themes or topics outside of the ones that we've just discussed are central to your book, and why are they important to you as well?
So the main theme throughout the book is actually forgiveness. So the two protagonists each have their own flaws, and what I actually did when I was writing this book is I created the character arc first. I was like, this is the character arc I want to tell, and I built the story around it. So a lot of it is about your interaction with your parents, your interaction with your kids, how much do you hold a grudge, how much is that worth to you?
Stuff we all go through in our regular lives.
And it's just about balance really. It's like, I never wanted to give an answer to any of these questions. I wanted to show both sides and kind of get the reader to ask themselves like, which one is important for my scenario.
Presenting a legal case.
Yeah. Because you could take any one thing, or any side of that thing, and you could justify it morally.
Interesting.
But it's not always going to be justifiable in any single scenario.
And so your hope is that when people read this, they'll go through their own introspection.
Yeah.
And the book is almost like a mirror to what they make it. I find it really interesting because a lot of authors say that, when they write their text, for example, George R.R. Martin famously put Tyrion Lannister as him in the book. That was his character. So you don't think you didn't go out by trying to imprint part of your personality on a specific character or a group of people?
I think my personality is littered throughout it, to be honest.
Well, that's interesting.
I think no one character is me, but parts of me are littered through like most characters. Because the whole
intentionally.
It's more so because the whole idea of the book is me portraying messages that I want to say. So it's very difficult for me to, I want to say this thing and then separate it from me and put it into a character without having a piece of me in it, in a sense.
And so how did you approach the moral complexities? So the bits where, you kind of presented the argument that a character makes one judgment over the other, did you do it in the hope to aim the challenge and to challenge the reader's perspective on these issues? Or, as you said before, was it literally, here's a case, I want you to make a judgment on whether you think it should go one way or the other?
I tried to have pretty much every scene where no character is 100% right. So everything they say is, they will say one thing that's right and one thing that's wrong. And then another character will say one thing that's right and one thing that's wrong, or like 70% right. And there's even a scene where they're discussing the world essentially, and it brings up this idea of colonization again. And I didn't want to say colonization is wrong. You shouldn't, like, this whole idea behind it is wrong. So I kind of discussed the fact that this world's been colonized, one person's against it, one person's for it because it's brought so many advancements to the world and to their society. And so I brought in the good and the bad, and then you kind of make that decision yourself.
And then that's laid out for you.
Yeah, but then there are also other parts where there's certain scenes where something is just purely good.
Black and white.
Yeah, black and white. So when they want to go against a certain decision or something, they don't attack it from the idea of you're wrong. They attack it from the idea of this particular part is wrong. This is the part that is just straight up immoral, and then that's why I want to do this certain thing.
To approach it differently. And how do you feel as you're going through these complexities? Obviously, the deeper you go into the book, the more detail it has to go through. How did your writing evolve to keep pace with all these issues? Because obviously, from a theoretical perspective, you're developing these character arcs, you're developing the world, you're getting people in that. But as you say, you're a self-taught writer in the first early years. How did you keep pace?
What I found was it's literally like being on training wheels. Like the first section of the book, you can see me improving my writing as you go along. You can see the dialogue improving. You can see me learning more about the characters. Because although I did have the outline, like I knew the character arcs, what's going to happen overall in the story. Some certain characters I didn't really flesh out until I'd gotten into actually writing them.
And for those early readers or editors, did they influence the final version of the book by their perspective on how they fed back information to you?
100%. So I had two beta readers. One kind of was just she was more into the two characters. She wanted more of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely added more scenes because of that. And then the second beta reader was really helping me out with like plot holes, making everything like tightened up. Like there was so many things he picked up on that nobody else would have noticed, and it really helped me make it a well-rounded story.
In terms of the feedback that you did get on towards the final version, did it change much of the storyline or the plot?
It didn't change the overarching plot. It was more so the middle section that needed work. So it changed a lot of the scenes in the middle section rather than the actual plot line. And like how you get from A to B rather than what is A and B.
And I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier on, about how you started writing this book. That year that you finished, you've moved on, and similar to the plot of the book, as it gets in more detail, your life gets more busy, you start your PGCE, you start working. How did you balance the demands of writing, having a social life? I mean, I know this is all happening in a cafe and people, go in and go out, but how did you manage to do that? It's a bit, I mean, I know teachers have time off and whatever, but marking and all the other stuff that goes with it.
So with teaching, I would never ever ever take anything out of work. So every piece of work I had to do, I would do it at school. And then if I need to stay late, I would stay late till like 5. And then every Saturday, I'd spend the entire day at a cafe. I would work on that. I'd work on the writing, and I would work on like my Arabic studies, things like that.
So you would consider, so on the work-life balance piece, this was more of a pleasure for you to go through
Yeah.
rather than part of the work side.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because a lot of authors, they go through this process and go, this is just work, I'm putting it off and I'm prioritising my social stuff, what I enjoy. So you attributed this to,
Yeah.
to the not the work part. Okay, that's quite interesting. So you're sitting there, you're in your cafe, you have your Spanish latte, everything's there. What role did social media, the internet, all the stuff that you're done research-wise actually play into the ideation of the book? Or was it merely just you're absorbing the world around you and you're looking at it from that perspective?
You know what? I think social media did play a big impact in some particular scenes and some particular arcs. Because what I would find is going through social media is, and you kind of see it in everyday life as well, there's a massive gender war. So like when people want to argue against something that men do, they will equate it to men. When people want to argue against something that someone, like some woman has said, they will equate it to women. And it's like, honestly, it's a disgusting mindset, and it's and people don't see how bigoted they're being, and rather than equating it to this one statement, they attack the person and the gender, rather than seeing the beauty and the differences.
And the premise of your character is they are flawed,
Yeah,
but you want to work through them, so it's almost the exact opposite
yeah,
of
exactly.
what's going on in the real world, like on the social media
Yeah.
that you're showing. Okay. The city itself, Seoul, plays quite a significant part in this. As in, I know you didn't build the world hugely, but it does play a big piece. How did you go about actually creating the scenes and the settings in which your characters were going through? Because I suppose the character arc is that, the plot is what it is, but where they ended up, kitchens, police stations, wherever, how did you think about that?
Some of it was research. Like I was thinking, how was Japan like so advanced in certain areas? So, like, for example, bullet trains, and I'll put that into their system. And then there's other parts where it was actually quite inspired by movies. So, like the kitchen idea was actually just inspired by Rush Hour. I remember there's a scene where they're in a restaurant and they go up and then they fight. I think it was Rush Hour 1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've just saw that come from Rush Hour fan of the audience.
And that's where it came from.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. And to the same theme, are there any particular authors or books that have influenced your writing style or approach? And if you say Ron Sanson, I'm going to kick you out.
Definitely not. I did read a bit of his, and it helped with like description, but I couldn't, like, the pacing of the books I was reading in terms of his.
I'm happy with the originality, thank you.
Yeah.
But were
They
there?
were. So when I used to read a lot was when I was a teenager, and the guy who wrote Scholarly Pleasant, I can't remember his name.
Rick Riordan.
Derek
Yeah.
Langley.
No, that's Rick Riordan is
That's
the
Percy Jackson.
Percy Jackson books, yeah.
What do you
Derek Langley.
Yeah. And he used to have like wit littered throughout his books, and I think that because I used to read it so much, it got ingrained into my personality, and then I put it into my book.
That's really interesting because it was at a moment in your life where you're building your own,
Yeah.
what you are as a person, and then you embody it.
Yeah.
Okay, so putting the book to one side. What advice would you give to aspiring authors, hopefully, of which some might be in the room?
I would say, if you're really passionate about it, don't write a story for other people. Don't write for an audience. Don't care about money. Write a story that you want to hear, and then no matter what, there will always be people who will appreciate that story.
Right from the heart.
Yeah.
What's next? Upcoming projects? I know you've got to go to the launch and then present this.
Yeah.
I think we've discussed this before. You said it's a single piece of
Yeah.
work, so there's nothing going to be further in this area, possibly.
Yeah. I left the world really open enough to go into it.
Okay.
I think if I was to ever come back to it, I'd write about raising kids.
Let's get to that stage in life first.
Yeah, I've got to figure out how to do that myself first. But I did have other ideas because I've never been one to like sequels that are there for no reason.
Mhm.
So what I did was, I was never planning to write another book. It was just I wanted to get this out and then be done with it. And then I had this really cool idea later on, like very recently, where the whole thing would be a fantasy world. And rather than write about Islam, I would portray those same ideas but from a more broad perspective, and everything would be a metaphor.
Okay, like a soft up
Yeah.
type of approach. So, okay, that's really interesting. Right, thank you very much. I know I've taken about 45 minutes of your time, but just quite enjoyable. Thread to the audience, any questions?
Question for me. You alluded to some elements of it in Takira's questions, but a bit more about the research, especially Yura, a female protagonist. What sort of research did you do around your family and friends to tap into that female sort of mind?
The amalgamation of characters.
Yeah, honestly, with a lot of female characters that I see, they go in the exact opposite way and they're faultless. And the way people give them value is they compare them to men, which is something I really hated. I was like, you just need to create a female character who's just a person. And I would speak a lot to my sister. She would really help me build up the character as well. So my sister-in-law, she helped me from the start. She would help me build up not just the physical descriptions of the characters, but also what they enjoy, what they hate, how they interact with each other. And it was also my sister helped me a lot as well.
Did that, or like personally, did that have any impact? Sort of understanding, maybe
Understanding
opposition?
I don't think anybody did.
Yeah.
Helped?
Nice.
Interesting. Any questions on that, Charles?
Same question.
Oh.
So you go.
Yeah, so I think one interesting fact which we haven't recorded but a few people know is you're a math teacher, and I presume, because I myself had the same reaction, that you told me, hey, I'm writing this book, but you're a math teacher. How has the reaction been? And I guess what are your thoughts coming from a math discipline, a math background, to writing a novel like this?
You know, I would say writing stories is actually quite mathematical in a sense, because a lot of the story is problem solving. So I know the start, I know the end, and you have to problem solve for how these characters get from point A to point B, and like how to do it in a way where there's no plot holes, and it works in line with their character. And so I found it might also be the same thing that holds me back, but it's also the same thing that helped me a lot, because it might potentially limit me in terms of creativity, but it definitely helps me create a good story. And in terms of the reaction, to be honest, I've had a lot of my English department asking me to start teaching English now. So.
Any other questions?
I have a follow-up, who is this book for?
Really, it comes down to my community. I think it's a book for everybody in my community. I think everybody in my community will benefit from it.
This has been written for us.
Yeah.
Is the point?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is very important in the grand scheme of things.
Question on the you was going on this journey of becoming a journalist. Why that industry in particular? Was there any a specific reason?
So it was because, to be honest, so the way they build their relationship in the book, I wanted to really show the beauty of mundane life. So a lot of the times that they're connecting with each other, they're just at home, doing nothing essentially. But you also need her to drive the story forward. She needs to play a key role in the story. So because he's a detective and because a lot of the idea behind it is crime and gangs and stuff like that, another way that she could be involved in that world, I decided was journalism, because investigative journalism, they're often going into dangerous areas to report and tell the world of the truth.
So it was a useful plot tool,
Yeah.
as well as something that would be an interesting
Yes.
device to be able to go forward for.
Yeah, and then luckily my sister was also studying the exact same thing, so I'd get a lot of advice from her.
I feel like you've outsourced a lot of the key parts of this book and absorbed. You know, the Mian household probably has a good hold of this book there than anybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Final message?
Final message, go buy my book.
And actually on the practical side, I know we've got plenty of copies here, but where can we find the book?
On Amazon, you can get ebook or paperback, just search Descent under my name, or you can search Descent, a Korean crime story.
Brilliant. And then there's merchandise that we can get
There's also a t-shirt as well.
We'll do a signing after this.
Yeah.
And I think Hassan, there was something that we wanted to say as well.
So,